So I just realized that I didn't do a finishing, or I didn't finish up, what was it, part 5 of Wednesday's lecture. So we still have classes and objects that we need to cover, and again, we just didn't have enough time to cover that, so I'm just going to cover that right now in a quick video. So essentially, Java features immensely powerful tools for writing object-oriented code. So unfortunately, most of this falls outside the scope of this class, but learn more about object-oriented programming and software design after we go through Java, and you should be able to get a better understanding of how Java works and how traditional object-oriented programming works in general. So what I'm going to first do is, let's see, open up this user.java file. And what we're going to see over here is that Java's object-oriented programming features are immensely powerful, but we're not showing that here, so that's good. So we have the same thing as we started off before, which is that we start off with a package. So this public class user belongs to this package. And so everything within the same package has accessibility to one another as long as it's public. We start off with this public class user, and so that means I can use this user class whenever I want to. Next we have this private static int. So this is a member of the public class user, and essentially it's only able to be used within the user class. So if I have a private and I have a static, suser is created and has a data type of int equals 0, I'm only going to be able to use that as a static class, or sorry, as a static member, and it's only going to be available to me inside user. A few other things, if I have private string username, private string email, same thing. And we can only let others see it if we give explicit permission. So I think I already went over like public and private on Wednesday, so that should be pretty straightforward at this point. Next we have this constructor function. So I mentioned constructors as well. We've been working with the constructor pattern in JavaScript, so now with Java it's a little bit different. It looks very similar, but it's set inside of the class itself. So I mentioned that you have a constructor function by default built in. So now we're explicitly calling it and we're constructing it ourselves. So we're passing in a string username and a string email. Make sure that the user, the constructor function matches the same as the class name. Again, we use this.setUsername. So set username, set email, these are methods that we created down here. I'm going to get to those in a little bit, but notice that I do user.sUsersCreated plus equals 1. So this is used internally. So every time we create a new user, the static member increases by 1. So again, this is private, so it's only used within our class. Next, we have a getter method. Our getter method is getUsername, and all that does is returns this.username. So because this is public, we're then able to use it outside of this class. But what it does is it returns this internal private username. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to use getters and setters, and I'm going to send out an article about that. I'm not going to get into that right now, though. All right, so next we have one for settings. So again, getters and setters work in tandem. So this is a private method for setting the username property. Notice that this one was public, so we can read information, or anyone can read information, but we only want to use this setting, meaning changing information internally. This is another method for getting, this is another method for setting, and this is just a print statement. So notice that this doesn't return anything. So public void, remember void means that you're not returning anything. These all have void as well. This actually returns a string, so you notice that this has a return statement, these don't have return statements. So it becomes pretty intuitive after you start using it for a while that when you use void, it's like, okay, I don't care about like returning anything. So that's why I use it. In this case, we're using the system.println and all that's going to do is print out the person's username, and that's all it does. And then if you wanted to see how many users were created, remember the amount of users created, this method over here, the static method, is actually used whenever a new user is instantiated from the user constructor function. So then we display that, and remember, if we return this, this is used internally, but because this is public, we can use it externally. So if I were to call it like this, outside of this class, that would be fine, and it would return how many users are inside of this member over here. So, if I created 3 people or 3 users, then it's going to be 3. All right. Let me see. What am I going to do next? Public, private, classes. Okay, so let's go to classes. So if we have these classes, and I'm using classes.java, notice that I have user.java and classes.java. And this classes.java is under the same package as user.java, which is classes. So I go here, and I'm like, oh, hey, it's the same one. Then I have the declaration that this is a public class, and then I have this public static void main. Remember, this is where execution goes. So if we run our classes.java file, what it's going to do is it's going to say user gym. So the data type of this new variable is going to be a user, and it's instantiating a new user. So it has access to this class user because it's in the same package. And we say gym and then gymwonderland.edu. So remember, that goes here and it says, oh, okay, we're going to pass in gym. And Gym Wonderland gets passed into here. So it sets gym here and then gymwonderland.edu in the email. And then what we can do is call this method called gym.introduce. Now notice that this is a instance method, right? So when we use that, that means it's on an instantiated version of, or an instance of the user class. So gym.introduce works. If I did user.introduce, that wouldn't work. So we can't use private methods. So if you tried gym.setEmail, that wouldn't work because again, it's private. So we're calling a method on the class. So let's say that we have a class method, user.getCount. Remember, that would be called on user, not on gym. Because if we go back to user and we get getCount, it's a static method. A static method can only be used on a class. All right, now let's say we created another one called throwaway, and it's a new user and has blank strings. This could also work, right? So again, if you use a static method on a class, it will work. If you use an instance method on an instance of an object or an instance of a class, it will work. Well, vice versa, it would not work. So let's go to another example. So let's say that we have this console.io.java, and it's a pretty difficult assignment. So I'm just going to go over what it does. So essentially, this is the same thing as what we went over earlier on Wednesday. So this was about creating that information form about a user. So let's say like a user comes in and they're like, okay, well, I want to create a new student. Okay, here's a new student, blah, blah, blah. Except we're now going to abstract that information across different modules. So instead of just putting everything in console.io.java, we now have roster.io.java or roster.java, student.java. So this is similar to how we did the Hangman game, where we started off with something that has everything in that Hangman game, but then eventually we split things out into modules. So exact same concept. But instead of modules, I mean, we still call them modules, but like, you have Java classes. So these classes over here are what we're using to instantiate different things. So very similar. So this one's pretty confusing, but essentially you want to just go to the main. So we're doing a while true, which is what we did before. And you instantiate a student in here inside console.io.java. So if you go to student, it says student create student. Well, create student seems to be coming from here. So if we go to create student, okay. So we have this hash map data type, has a key as a string and a value as a string. And we name the variable proxy, and it's going to instantiate this new hash map class. And from there, we have an array. And this array is instantiated with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements. And this array is called keys, and they're all strings. So notice that you can only have a single data type with arrays inside Java, as opposed to JavaScript. From there, you call a for in loop, and you say, okay, for each key inside this keys array, perform this function called getNext. So we go to getNext. Okay. Now this is going to return a void, so it's just performing functionality without returning anything. So getNext takes in a object, and this object, essentially a hash map is an object, and it has a key value pair of a string and a string. So that's something similar to what we have here. So we named this proxy and we passed it in to getNext. So we have this proxy object with first name, last name, middle name, address, email, and phone number as the different keys across this object. Next, we passed in each key that's inside each one of these. So it's just looping through. So it's going to say, please enter the student's first name. Then please enter the student's last name. Then please enter the student's middle name. So it's looping through each one of these keys. From here, we check the input has next line. So this is a Boolean. So if there is an input, and again, we have to use this Java util scanner. So, and I had to use hash map as well. And array list, yeah. So make sure you guys import those if you are going to use these different things, because everything doesn't come default with Java. Again, that's with like memory saving and all that. And it's the same thing as JavaScript. You don't want to include everything. You just import whatever you need. So from there, it says, okay, I have this student now, right? Because this is the object that we're passing in. So the object that we passed in is this object that now has all these different keys. And this object is called student in this case. And then with a hash map, you can change the value of a key by using put. So since we're looping through each one using this getNext, it's just going to go and pass each key inside this keys, and it's going to say, oh, okay, well, wherever you find first name, put in whatever the user put in for the first name. So this is a more efficient way of creating users because it's going through a loop. And then it's going to go last name, then middle name, then address, email, and phone number. All right, so once that's done, once that student is created, now you have this student, which is returned and saved inside student. So once you did create student, you return the student. So return new student with this proxy. So you're instantiating student based on the information from this proxy that was created. So if we go to student, and you just passed in an object, and Java is interesting because, and like C-based languages are interesting, if you pass it, so if you have multiple constructors, this is perfectly legal. And what you can do is, depending on the number of arguments passed in, it will know, and what argument passed in, it will know which constructor to use. So we have this constructor function over here, which is, okay, I take in only a hash map object, right? And it's a string student proxy. And what this will do is it will set the first name, and it will just set all these different things. If you have a student and you pass it all this information, then it will do the following. So this will do like default information, and this will do it'll set it to whatever information you pass to it. So if we have, let's go back to console.io. So if you have this proxy, and this proxy is an object, and it has all this information in it, then it's going to create this new student with all the information placed into it. Once we have that information created and saved inside student, so remember we're creating this, and then it gets saved from here into our variable student. Then we do student.report, and .report is just a function that prints out all of our information for the student. From here, this is all the exact same stuff as we had earlier, so that should be the same. Alright, so that should prepare you for what we're going to cover on Saturday. Again, this is all tough stuff, and this is optional, so if you feel lost, feel free to message me or message the general channel first, and then I'll see if I can respond. Alright, there you guys.